It's still going on, Matt.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
They've just got into, they've finished the main meeting, they've just gone into public session, or private session.
Right, we'll make a start now on this, I think, if that's okay with everybody. The recording has started, I can see that. Good afternoon, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service Risk-Based Inspection Programme Inquiry. I've got a few words I want to say just because, for the record, because this will be kept as a record for anybody to go in and look at in the future. This inquiry is being held virtually via online meetings using Microsoft Teams, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending today's witness evidence gathering session. I'm Councillor Carolyn Rule and I'm the chairman for the inquiry, and I'm joined by my fellow inquiry members, Councillors Martin Alvey, Dominic Fairman, Matt Luke and John Simons. And we're supported today by Justin Sharp from Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service, who is the area manager, and he's also the head of community risk reduction, and also Joe Heather, who is our democratic and governance officer, who's managing and overseeing the process. The witness evidence gathering sessions are not being held in public, but recordings of each session will be made available on the inquiries area of the Council's website for viewing by the public. Other Cornwall councillors who are not part of the inquiry are able to join the sessions as observers. I just realised I haven't got my camera on. Yeah. The objectives from the inquiry team of reference are as follows: to consider whether the current assessment of risk is an appropriate model for Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service, and 2, to consider the future allocation of resource to deliver Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service's overarching protection role, including statutory and non-statutory activities and the primary authority role. Domestic properties and prevention and response activities are not included in the scope of the inquiry's work. The inquiry process consists of a number of recorded witness evidence gathering sessions, supported by informal organisational sessions, background briefing information, an initial informal introduction session, and an informal virtual site visit to Park House Flats in St Austell. The recorded witness evidence gathering sessions comprise of us virtually receiving evidence from witnesses who have particular experience, knowledge and expertise to help us. We value the input of all the witnesses who give up their valuable time to take part in our process and thank them for their input. The witnesses in attendance today are Stuart Whitworth and Dave Pilling from Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service, Helen Turner and Sophie Coles from Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service, Joe Roberts, Angie McGinn and Chris Stanbury from Cornwall Council. And with regard to the questioning of our witnesses, the process for each will be the same. Each witness will be asked very briefly introduce themselves, and then the inquiry members will ask them a series of questions. Only the inquiry members may ask the witnesses questions. Other members in attendance online who are not part of the inquiry are able to observe the proceedings, and I will give them the opportunity to comment at the end of each witness session. Although if time becomes tight, this may need to be at the end of the session as a whole. Due to limited time, I will ensure that questions and answers are kept as succinct as possible, particularly as there could be supplementary questions based on responses to our other questions. Further written clarification may be sought if necessary. All questions and responses are to come through me as the chairman. Once witnesses have finished giving evidence, they are more than welcome to stay online for the remainder of the meeting as an observer. The evidence from the sessions will then be used to support the inquiry's findings and recommendations, which will be reported back to Neighbourhoods Overview and Scrutiny Committee as the parent committee for approval on the 21st of January 2021, and then onward recommendation to the Cabinet for consideration on the 10th of February 21. So we start off. So I've welcomed everybody. Thank you very much for that. It's good to have you with us. And we start off with Stuart Whitworth and Dave Pilling as our two first witnesses, if we may, please. And we've got a block of about 45 minutes for this, if we can. We've got several questions to put to you, gentlemen, and we'll start off with Dominic, if I may, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and good afternoon, gents. So question number one, what drives our protection activity? And I'm happy to leave it to you to decide who. So sorry, you're on mute, Stuart. Yeah,
You're You're both muted at the moment, Stuart and Dave.
I made a false start.
Sorry.
Hopefully that'll be last. So thanks very much. Yeah, my name's Stuart Whitworth. I'm the group manager for West Cornwall service delivery, but I also have the sort of functional role overseeing protection, prevention, and road safety. Really, our protection activity falls out from the Fire and Rescue Services Act and various other bits of legislation that fall down from that. We have to produce an IRMP, an integrated risk management plan, which is very much risk focused. We complete what's called a risk-based evidence profile, which looks at risk across the county in terms of protection. That's looking at commercial activity. Domestic premises are largely accounted for by our prevention work stream, which I'm also lead. The legislation specifically around protection is the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005, which actually came into being in 2006. And there was a lot of guidance. Initially, it was called Guidance Note 4, IRMP Guidance Note 4, published in 2005, which gave advice for fire and rescue services to follow in relation to identifying risks so that they could make their risk-based inspection programs specific to each county. Subsequent to that, there's various national framework documents have been published throughout the intervening time, the last one being 2018. And as part of the IRMP, the service has a number of priorities, which protection being one of them, prevention, response, and performance. So we're very performance focused, very risk based. As I said, we use that risk-based evidence profile to identify the number of premises that we consider that come under the fire safety order. And within the county, that's around 46,000 commercial premises, which we have used various skills and tools to identify what we feed into the risk-based inspection program. What we also use is more specifically to stations. We have station profiles and team plans. So within Justin Sharp's team, we use an overarching document called the Community Risk Reduction Plan, which falls underneath the IRMP itself. But what we try to make sure is that all of the staff throughout the service understand, from the top, that what we call the golden thread. It is very much influenced by our own local incidents in terms of large commercial fires, and also national incidents such as Grenfell in 2017 and the Cube fire in Manchester, and other significant events which you probably would have all seen on the national news. But for ourselves, we have had a number of significant fire incidents, such as the Penhallow Hotel fire in Newquay, and that obviously is going to influence what we do in terms of our protection work. And following out from particularly national incidents, changes in legislation. So following the Grenfell fire in London, there was the Hackett Review and the Building Safer Futures report, which has subsequently been published. That's work stream, although the fire was over 2 years ago, still hasn't been finalised, but it will affect our work. It's affecting our work currently, but also that will have a major influence on our work streams in the future, because what is basically coming out of that is that the government want tighter control, particularly between the fire authority, building control, and the health and safety executive, to ensure that buildings are not only designed safely, they are built safely and they're maintained safely throughout, because obviously nobody wants to see a repetition of Grenfell. So I'm aware we could probably talk around this for the whole 40 minutes.
Thank you, and I think lots of the other questions will tease things out, but specifically about my question about, so you've touched on the legislation and the national guidance. Is there anything that you feel personally, professionally, that within the national legislation and guidance hinders Cornwall in meeting the the national targets for prevention work?
Well, I mean, it's protection work. In terms of national targets, let's kind of not look at the target thing, but it's about identifying what the risk is. And in 2005, and as I said, that guidance note was fairly clear, but there's been 15 years since then. And back in January, I attended a national seminar up in Merseyside, which was looking at risk-based inspection programs. And what the National Fire Chiefs Council have committed to do is to produce some new additional guidance, which was scheduled to come out in January 2021. Obviously, COVID's had the impact that it's had across the country. But I did bring back additional risk because you had speakers from across the country, and each county is different. And I'm sure everybody on this call is really aware of what Cornwall is. We as a service are very, very aware of our seasonality, our rurality, our geography. So our risk is entirely different to Merseyside, which is entirely different to Oxford. So at the seminar, I was sat on the table with representatives from both of those services, and things like heritage buildings. Merseyside, although they do have a number of Grade 1 listed buildings, wouldn't prioritise that in the same way as Oxford would. So Oxford, being the university capital, and pretty much the whole of Oxford is Grade 1 category. And then transfer it to Cornwall, we have a number of heritage buildings, St Michael's Mount, Lanhide Rock. We have a lot of thatched buildings, but not to the same degree as Dorset. So we do have to look at it, although there's national guidance, we must look at this very, very locally and use all of the tools that we've got alongside the professional knowledge that we as a service and individuals within the service have to really identify and be confident of what we agree in Cornwall is the highest risk.
Thanks, Stuart. That was a very full answer. We've got lots of questions, so perhaps if we can, we may tease out some rather than going into such a full answer maybe each time, possibly. Dave, did you want to add anything to that? Dave Pilling.
No, Councillor, no, I think Stuart's covered all that with the golden thread and the the legislations. Obviously, we've got a bit feedback. Can you put yours on mic? Apologies, we've got a bit of feedback.
No, Stuart is muted.
I think we're in the same room.
Yeah, Stuart has muted his.
Yeah, just to expand on what Stuart said about local and national incidents will also influence our activities. Obviously, Glenville Towers was an example. The Cube Fire was another example. So that's fairly dynamic. So we've got the golden thread, but then obviously local, national incidents will affect our protection activities moving forward, depending on national incidents that we have to then concentrate our own protection activities around those particular premises, but nothing else apart from that. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. The next question is from Matt, please.
Okay, I think you kind of answered this already in partly, but I'll go on with it anyway. How do you prioritise? Take my tongue out a minute. And please define high risk and how this relates to the risk-based inspection programme.
Okay. Again, Stuart's probably touched on this slightly, but we prioritise based on risk. That's what we've got to base our sort of priorities on, given the number of resources we've got. It's based on risk, and that risk is identified through our risk-based evidence profile, like Stuart said. And currently we define our high risk as in accordance with the Integrated Risk Management Plan Guidance Note 4, which came out in the very early days of the introduction of the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. And that sort of guided us into premises where people sleep as being the most high risk. And those premises include hotels, care homes, nursing homes, hospitals, and those types of premises where people sleep. They may be unfamiliar with those types of premises. Obviously, holiday makers come into a hotel, maybe complex, not that au fait with the means of escape. So that is one area that we class as high risk or define as high risk currently within the service. Also those premises that have had a fire where we've attended. Obviously, if we've had a fire in a premises that falls under the scope of the RRO, something may have gone wrong. Obviously, their risk assessment may not be suitable and sufficient for that fire to have occurred in the first place. So again, part of our policies and procedures will be that we will follow up on premises where there's been a fire. And that doesn't necessarily mean those premises that are high risk, hotels, care homes. That could be an office block, it could be a cafe or a restaurant, for example. So if a non-domestic premises has a fire, we will follow up on that. And the last one is premises where we receive a complaint from the members of the public or another agency. Again, we will deem that as high risk because we've received the complaint and we'll follow up accordingly with a fire safety audit or a phone call, depending on what that complaint is.
Lovely, thank you. Stuart, did you want to add anything to that answer, my love? Stuart?
I don't think he does. I think Stuart might be relocating to try and cut down on the feedback.
Right. So we'll move on then, shall we? Thank you for that. The next question is from John, please.
Thank you. Yeah. How many premises does Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service regulate under the Regulatory Reform Order of 2005?
Yeah, we've got around about 46,000 premises that fall under the scope of the Fire Safety Order 2005. We've also got an additional 11,000 premises on our protection toolkit, which we're currently working through as well, so a percentage of those 11,000 could consequently increase that 46,000 premises numbers. So that's what we've got currently, and we've got around 1,500, 1,600 high-risk premises currently on our risk-based inspection program that fall under the scope of the fire safety order.
Okay.
Forgot I was muted. Is that okay? Did you have any supplementary, John, or is that okay?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Stuart, are you back with us? Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I'm very happy with myself and Dave. So.
Thank you, darling. That's lovely. The next one is from me, please. How many of these have we inspected or audited, and how many were unsatisfactory and required further action, and how many led to prosecution, please, out of that huge number?
Dave, I'll leave that one to you if that's okay.
Yes. I haven't got the exact figure, apologies, Councillor, on the number of that we've actually audited in since the introduction of the order back in 2006. So for what we've audited in terms of the premises that fall under the scope. Obviously, our risk-based inspection programme, we do concentrate on the high-risk ones, the sleeping ones, which I've already mentioned, which is around about 1,500. So we go back to those premises at least once every 5 years, 3 years, depending on the score from the previous audit. The other premises that fall under the scope of the order, we wouldn't ordinarily visit and audit unless they've had a fire or we receive a complaint. So in terms of total numbers of audits across the whole premises type, fall under the scope of the order. I haven't got that information, but I can find that out for you, Council, if you want me to.
Yeah.
In terms of prosecutions, we've served a number of prohibition notices over the year and enforcement notices, and we've successfully prosecuted two premises so far, 3 premises, and since 2006, one being the Penhallow Hotel, the Cliff Hotel, and a self-catering accommodation. And we are currently in the process of prosecuting a further self-catering premises in Perranporth, which goes to court in December.
Right, thank you. Is it possible you could let us have those figures just to feed them in? Perhaps if you send them through through Justin or through Joe, Heather, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
I will do that.
Thank you, Dan. That would be lovely. Right, next one to ask the question is Martin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Is our protection activity focused in the right areas, and what improvements could be made?
Yeah, if I can take that one, Councillor. Obviously, we do have a finite resource in terms of staff, so we've used the tools that have been given to us, the guidance note 4. We've used the best evidence that we can get locally, created the risk-based evidence profile to really drive our risk-based inspection programme, and that has focused on sleeping areas predominantly where people are unfamiliar. Top of the tree would be hospitals, then care homes, then hotels, hostels, larger bed and breakfasts. And at various stages since the legislation change, we have done reviews. We look at it's not just the number of audits that we carry out, but it's the number of unsatisfactory audits, which would also trigger the percentage of enforcement notices, prohibition notices, and potentially leading onto prosecutions. And when we have driven down to sort of look at, are we in the right areas, we are confident as a service that the sleeping risk is the number one, and we are focusing our efforts accordingly. And I know that when the HMI CFRS came down last year, they were trying to drill down into some statistics, and unfortunately they weren't talking quite the right terminology. They were talking about prohibitions when they actually meant enforcement notices. So I know Lord Greenhalgh, who is the Fire Minister, has recently run a report, which again I don't have it today, but we could certainly furnish you with that, and that has a table of each fire and rescue service and how your protection activity, the proportion of non-compliance, enforcement notices, etc. So we can certainly focus that with you. And although the year that they were reporting, our overall number of audits was low, the proportion of non-compliances was good. It proves that we are actually in the right place in the majority. Yes, when I came back from the national seminar, can we do things better? Yes, so we have tried to link in with the National Trust to build up some more data around heritage premises. We've also done a lot of work looking at the self-catering trade within Cornwall, which everybody will understand has really flourished over the past 15 years, particularly since the legislation changed. And things like Airbnb are quite difficult companies to deal with because they kind of exist in cyberspace. But we've worked very hard with the local letting agents to try to link up. We've run seminars because, again, it is sleeping risk, although the premises itself are generally smaller. But it's an area that we've done a lot of data cleansing. This year, we've cleansed 11,000 premises that we've got from the council gazetteer, and recoded them, or correctly coded them, and put them into CFRS, which is our protection management system. At the moment, we would not recognise them as being high risk premises per se, but again, where we do get complaints, as Dave has highlighted, we will go and investigate. As we said, we have prosecuted one, and we have another prosecution ongoing imminently.
Thanks. So building on that answer, I take really from what you said that in terms of improvement, then it's more around better intelligence than better resource. And I appreciate that gathering intelligence is a resource thirsty activity, but it's around intelligence rather than resource.
I think it's a really good question, and it is a blend of both. So it's about improving our intelligence, making sure that our information is current, and but also what we do want to do is expand our limited resource at the moment, which is our inspecting and enforcement officers, to try to build our competence and confidence in our operational crews. We have to do that aligned to what's called a competency framework. But what we are very keen to do is develop our operational crews, get them to what's called a level 3 qualification, so they can actually go out and do some meaningful fire safety work and audits. And that's got the added benefit of it improves their knowledge of local buildings. So public safety, firefighter safety is naturally improved, because when our crews are looking at buildings that are on fire, they'll understand the fire dynamics and why buildings are or are not working, or when unusual things are happening, such as in Grenfell or the Cube fire. And when things are rapidly going wrong, we want our crews to understand why, really importantly why, and B, how to ask for more resources very early.
Thanks, Stuart. That's brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dave, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I think just a couple of things for myself. I think, like Stuart's touched on, with the number of resources we've got, yes, I think we are focused in the right areas. However, I think a review of our current risk-based inspection programme is well overdue, and it's something that we are sort of making headway towards, looking at reviewing that risk-based inspection programme. And for me, I think it'd be nice to have some additional resources to enable us to sample some of the lower risk premises that fall under the scope of the order. We spoke about the high risk premises where we're concentrating on. If you look at our evidence risk profile, a number of fires occur in some of the lower risk premises, and we do go to those after they've had a fire. So for me, I think I would like to see us sort of sampling some of those low risk premises where we have fires, and just being a little bit more proactive in those areas rather than reactive to when they've had the fires. So life safety, yes, definitely. Hotels, care homes, that's where the life safety is. But evidence is telling us not necessarily that's where we're having all our fires. So I think we need to have a blend of both. But again, that comes down to the resources, or maybe looking at other ways we can achieve that through, like Stuart's touched on, additional training for our operational personnel, maybe a level 3 standard, perhaps, where they could do some of the sampling of the lower non-complex buildings that fall under the scope of the order.
Yeah, thank you for that. Dominic, did you want to ask a question on that? It's your question next anyway.
Oh yeah, no, I'll defer my question because I see it's covered later on, and I'll just get on straight with my question, if that's okay.
Thank you. Yes, if you would, please.
A straightforward question: how many premises do Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service audit each year, and how does the number of audits undertaken align to the national average, please?
Yeah, in the last year, Councillor, we audited around 420 premises from the risk-based inspection programme. How that compares nationally, the national average is about 5%. 420 is about 1% of our overall figures of 46. So national average is 5. Our percentage is 1, although I think the figures dropped around about 3% nationally, but at its height was 5%. So we fall well below the national average of 3. at 1% and obviously 5% when it was at its most. And I think just on that, nationally, audits have dropped by about 42%. So we're not the only fire and rescue service whereby our audits have dropped. Nationally, they've dropped by about 42% across the country. Previous year to that, I think was around about 319 audits. But going back to when I first joined the fire safety team as a watch manager, we were doing something around about 1,300 audits a year. So over that 10-year period, we've seen a significant drop in the number of audits that we do. But that's as a consequence of losing some resources, unfortunately.
Okay.
Have you been offered? So, is anybody looking at the national picture and offering an explanation or a narrative why it might be dropping nationally rather than locally?
Yes, the HMI inspections, they're picking up the data on that and identifying that drop, and that's where those figures have come from through the HMI inspections, through the HMI returns that we do, and the Home Office returns that we do each year. And I think my opinion is when the fire safety order first came into place back in 2006, it focused on being a bit more self-regulating, so responsible persons taking a little bit more responsibility for the fire safety, regulating themselves. And I think over a period of time, fire and rescue services thought that would be the case and subsequently reduced their fire safety protection officers accordingly. I think it's since transpired that that's not the case, and we still need to be going into these premises. We still need to be auditing to make sure that those RPs are, making sure that their risk assessments are suitable and sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Right, we've got lots of questions left to ask rather. So if we can try and make the answers a little bit quicker, if that's possible. I'm sorry, I know you're passionate about what you're doing and you need to get the information out to us, but if we can be a little bit quicker or shorter on the answers, that would be really helpful. Matt Newt next, please.
Okay. In relation to high risk, how many premises are on the risk-based inspection program? I think you've already given us this information anyway, but and I don't want it down to the exact number, just a generalization of estimation, should I say?
It's around 1,600.
Right. Okay.
And
there we are. That's easy.
Indeed.
Thank you very much for that. That was a really quick answer and quick question. Thank you. And the next one is John, please.
Yes, thanks very much. How often are premises on the high risk based inspection program inspected as part of it?
Well, mathematically, it works out between 3 to 5 years. As Dave said, the number of audits at the moment is around 420. We're hoping to see an increase in that number. It does align to the status of our inspection officers. A couple of years ago, we had a number who were in development. The competency framework that I mentioned earlier dictates the qualifications that you need to carry out high risk protection audits, and really pleased now that all of our team of inspecting officers are now fully qualified. So we are hoping to see an improvement in that. The flip side is the protection work across the board is increasing, so we are doing more work around building regulations now. One of the things that has come out from Grenfell is the amount of scrutiny within the construction industry has been sort of under question, and that's why this joint competent authority between the health and safety executive, fire and rescue services, and building control has been recommended. So it's not an easy thing, and as we said earlier, it's not just about the number of audits, it's making sure that we are focusing in the right areas. So hopefully I've answered the question in not too long time.
Yeah, thank you very much, that's fine.
Thanks, thank you both. Right, the next one is from me, please. We understand that there are a number of national and local influences on protection. Can you expand on this for us? please.
Dave, over to you.
Yep. Not a problem. I know we've touched a little bit on them as part of question one and the golden thread, but if we look at the national influences, Councillor, we've got the fire safety bill that's currently going through Parliament, which will affect our the influence on our protection activities in terms of premises, external wall claddings, balconies, fire doors that lead flat fire doors that lead up onto the means of escape. So again, it will give us greater enforcement powers around enforcing those areas which we haven't had before. So that's a real positive. However, it will, as a consequence, increase our workload potentially through the fire safety bill. There's a review of the fire safety order that's currently going through as well, and we've fed back on that through the call for evidence and through the consultation process. So again, hopefully that should make things a lot better for us in terms of some of the review of that fire safety order, should I say, because it's not been reviewed since its inception back in 2005. So that will be a positive for us. We've got the Hackett report, the Glenfell Towers and the GTI Glenfell Towers inquiry recommendations that have fallen out of that unfortunate event. We've got a specific task and finish group now looking at within the service. So we're looking at all our high-risk residential buildings, making sure that those recommendations are fed through to those building owners. We've got the State of the Nation report, which was produced through the HMI findings. We've got the National Fire Chiefs Council Protection Reform Committee that's looking at reforming protection activities generally, nationally. And that's based on the feedback from the HMI inspections. So again, that will influence our protection activities moving forward. The framework document, integrated risk management plan, which is a 3-year plan. Again, that will influence what we do moving forward in the future with regards to protection activities and where our priorities will be. The risk-based evidence profile and also our risk-based inspection programme. They're the sort of areas that will influence our protection activities moving forward.
Thank you, Dave. That's interesting. On to Martin next, please. The next question.
Thanks. And then this has kind of already been answered, but I wonder if you just again remind us of the technical definition of a high-rise residential building, or HHRB, and a high-risk premises, HRP. So the technical definitions, really.
Yeah, high-rise is anything more than 18 metres with a floor, habitable floor above 18 metres. So very roughly, when you're looking at a residential block, it's basically 3 metres is the normal kind of calculation that we'd use. So within Cornwall, there's only one genuine or true high-rise, which is Park House Flats, right in the middle of St Austell. We've done an awful lot of work with them, Ocean Housing, that own that. And then there is one that just does fall in, because there's a 2-storey flat on the top floor in the middle of Penzance called Fountain Court. And again, we've got a very, very good relationship with Fountain Court. So both of our buildings that we do classify as high-rise residential buildings, we've done an awful lot of proactive work, both before the Grenfell incident and particularly since then. But we don't have the same building stock as, for example, Bristol or some of the larger cities. So when myself and Dave or Justin are attending the National Fire Chiefs Council regional meetings, we're just able to report on what we've got locally. That's not to say we consider a 5-storey building in Newquay, which we've got a lot of hotels that that have since kind of been knocked down and then redeveloped, because we would adapt the same operational procedures for any multi-storey building, whether it's Trillisk Hospital or an apartment block in Newquay Penzance or Bude. But in terms of true definition, high rise would be above 6 meters. That's 18 meters, 6 stories. And in terms of higher risk premises coming from that joint work with private sector housing and falling out of the fire safety bill, is looking at specialist housing, sheltered housing, so things like coastline housing, which obviously we've got an awful lot of that in the county. And again, we've done a lot of proactive work around putting sprinkler systems into some of those buildings for the most vulnerable.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Stuart. Right, moving on. Is that okay, Martin? Yeah. Moving on then to Dominic as the next one, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. How could we improve the number of fire safety audits, and what are you doing now to improve the performance in this area, please?
I think more people, more resources would be appreciated. But I think also we've got to look at how we currently deliver our service, our protection activities, and again, maybe looking at is our current structure the best structure? We're currently split between service delivery, where our fire safety protection officers work from, and then we've got the policy team where I work from. So we've got two different teams really working to achieve our protection priorities. So I'm not sure whether that currently works that well. So again, I think for me, I think we need to look at how our structure, what our structure looks like. Could we improve our structure to increase those orders? But that we need to. I've touched on training our operational watchers to a level 3 standard, whereby they could sort of start to audit some of the lower risk, non-complex buildings. Tri-service officers, again, we've got a group of tri-service officers that we could potentially qualify to a level 3. So again, they could maybe look at doing some audits as well. And for me, better succession planning. I think Stuart's alluded to it. It takes about 3 years to become a level 4 diploma officer. Unfortunately, at the moment, we seem to let people retire or leave the team before we start to succession plan. So I think we need to be better at that. We need to highlight when these retirements are coming up, when people will be moving on, and start to get people in our team earlier, because there's a problem by waiting till people go, because we have to wait 3 years then before they're competent to do the audit. So better succession planning for me would be a definite moving forward. IT as well, we're sort of working on improving our IT, mobile working, whereby at the moment fire safety officers will go out, do the audit, come back, complete a typing request. The admin team then type the letter up, depending on the outcome of the audit. So we're looking at ways about how we could actually formulate that letter on site, whereby then it could be just emailed to the responsible person. Therefore, potentially the fire safety officer could maybe fit more audits in per week if we reduce that administration burden on them. So that's another way that we're looking at improving the number of audits. Green Book, again, looking at maybe having more non-uniformed officers within the protection team. It's a cheaper resource than our uniformed staff, and they can be trained to the same level. And what we'll probably find is that they won't probably move along as much as some of our watch managers, because we find a number of our watch managers either retire or want to be promoted to the next level, whereby they may not necessarily be doing protection activity. So Green Book, probably more stable. And I think we need to have clear pathways for people coming into protection as well, crew managers. So you start your protection career, if you like, as a crew manager, and then move up to watch manager, station manager. So we need to make a clear pathway for people coming into the team, which will then ultimately keep people within the protection team, because those opportunities will be there.
Okay, so $64 question is then, I presume, within current resources, if we were to do all those things, restructuring, better succession planning, improved IT, if all those things were implemented, do you feel that then we would be confident at a future inspection of perhaps reaching a good standard?
I think it will go a long way towards that, Councillor. I don't think it will sort of still give us the number of audits per year that I would personally like to achieve. Personally, I'd like to go back 10 years ago when we were doing 1,200, 1,300 audits. That's where I'd like to get back to. Those recommendations that I just sort of spoke about, I don't think that will get us back to those sort of numbers, but it would be really good for us to be able to go to high risk buildings at least once a year, once every 2 years, whereby 3 to 5 years where it is now. My opinion is that's not really acceptable in those high risk premises, but it will go some way towards doing that, because if we get people auditing some of the low risk premises, we can concentrate our efforts using our level 4 diploma officers in those high risk areas, which will then alleviate some of the work that they have to do.
Right, thank you for that. We need to move on, Dom, really, sorry. Is that okay? Yeah. Can I go to Matt next, please? Matt Luke.
Yep. Do we have sufficient resource, we've answered that already, to service a revised risk-based inspection programme, which would include identifying risk inspections, enforcement and prosecutions? I'd also like to add on to that, seeing you've answered after that already. Can we apply a charge for these inspections if it's a commercial premises?
Yeah, I'm kind of looking. It's a statutory duty that we have to do. So I sadly I don't think that we can apply a charge for that. Obviously, once we've gone down a prosecution route, then we would get any costs for that, and the if there was a charge allocated to the person. But to go back to the very first part of the question, I think we probably have answered that. We're struggling with the number one thing, which is resource. But again, until National Fire Chiefs Council give us some additional guidance, we've been because we're so limited, we've really not wanted to reinvent the wheel this year. We have implemented the little bits and pieces that are brought back from Merseyside. We've looked at self-catering, we've looked at heritage, we've looked at our operational risk register, which I probably haven't mentioned actually, and those are the buildings that present a significant risk to either firefighters, the public, or an environment. So we have site-specific risk information for those, but we might not necessarily, because they're not a sleeper risk, we might not have carried out a full fire safety audit on them. In the period, we have carried out audits on them, although because COVID has been in front of us, a number of those have been what we call desktop audits rather than face-to-face audits because of COVID preventing us from going on site. So yeah, I'm really keen to get the guidance and to look at what we've got, because I am confident that we're in a good place in terms of skill sets for our current team, and it's our challenge over the next couple of years to make sure that when those inspecting officers do progress up or move across, that we've got really good succession planning in behind them.
Thank you, Stuart. That's good.
Okay.
Next one is John Simons, please.
Sorry, yeah, thank you. What are the biggest risks or barriers, challenges to the implementation of protection work?
Yeah, I can take some of that. I think we've already covered some of those, Councillor. Yeah. But yes, I think we've got the competency framework now, which is something that we are intending to fully embed within the protection team, which sort of gives clear directions to the qualifications, CPD that our protection officers will need to undertake audits in the future. We've got the level 3, level 4, level 5, level 6 officers. So again, that's potentially going to be a barrier. We haven't got anyone trained at a level 5 standard yet. Our maximum at the moment is a level 4. Perhaps we won't go to level 6, that's sort of engineering status, so that's one thing. Succession planning we spoke about, I believe that is a barrier and a challenge that we need to get over. Staff development, again with limited resources, we haven't got the the capacity for people to shadow other qualified fire safety officers. So new people coming into the team just haven't got the capacity for them to be able to shadow a more qualified officer. So I think that is important. Structure that we spoke about previously. Funding, again, resources. We can talk about that all day. That is one of the major sort of challenges that we've got. Future retirements coming up. We've identified over the next probably 5 years, a lot of our senior fire safety officers, including myself, Stuart, and a number of others, are due to retire in the next 5 years. So again, that's going to be a real challenge to us as a service, especially if we don't start succession planning now to replace the likes of me and Stuart, because again, we're all enforcement officers as well. So we really need to start looking at steps to start replacing some of our officers that are due to retire in the next 4 or 5 years. I think staff welfare as well is something we need to consider, where our team is under a lot of pressure to deliver what we need to deliver. So again, staff welfare, good stress management of our staff. We need to be fully aware of the stress that some of our staff are under by placing such a huge workload on them at the moment. So I think that's something else that we need to be concerned about. And also we've got I think it applies to a lot of the service. We've got a temporary structure in place at the moment. I think we need to just start firming up some of the temporary posts, particularly around that protection area, to enable us to move forward and get people in substantive posts that can actually deliver our protection activities moving forward.
Thank you, Dave. That's good. Dominic, you've got a question for Dave, please.
Yeah, very quickly. Do you feel that the balance between the number of on-call firefighters and whole-time firefighters is a barrier to the implementation of the protection work?
Definitely. As you know, we've got a limited number of whole-time operational staff that we can potentially train up to a level 3 qualification, but there would be I can't see any obvious or immediate way of training up any on-call firefighters to assist with fire protection. It is a very specialist field, and so yes, definitely that ratio doesn't help us. If it was the other way around, then yes, we would be able to use more of our operational staff to deliver our activities.
Thank you for that. The next one is from me. As changes would you make to improve service delivery? I think you've already touched on it by saying about the succession planning. Is there anything else that you would raise here?
Yeah, I think we have spoken about quite a lot of these.
Yeah.
Just improving our partnership work. We've got some great examples that came out of COVID, of working with our other regulatory partners and stuff that actually the service users really wanted, and things like webinars were very, very popular coming in throughout COVID, coming out of COVID, and only last week I was in a meeting with Mark Luxton, Mark James, Stuart Benson about how we looked towards Christmas and making sure people were COVID compliant, only for the government to come and slam on lockdown too. So we still work very, very closely with them, and we do want to continue that. So as part of some funding that we've got from the government post Grenfell, we are looking to have a joint role with private sector housing for an appointment that would help any of the work that comes out of the fire safety bill. I think we do want to look at Green Book options, and as for the reasons Dave said, there is less movement away from the service, so our workforce would be far more stable, which allows us to invest in them, to take them through the competency framework levels up to whichever level, if we choose to get a fire engineer. Succession planning is, so I think there's a number of opportunities that are out there. We genuinely have struggled with resource to even just maintain the contacts that we've got, because we're having more and more pressure put on our time.
Thank you, Stuart. Martin, your question's next. I think he's just answered it, but I'll hand over to you now.
I was going to say, through a few of the answers, it's pretty well covered. The question was going to be, how does the protection team work in collaboration with others? As I say, I think you've answered much of it, but if there is anything else that you want to add in on that, then by all means do.
Well, yeah, certainly just around some of the most vulnerable, particularly at the moment, a very topical example, which most of you will probably be aware of, is the migrant worker site at Hawks Tor in the Glyn Valley, which came to our notice right during COVID, just as the Tulip employees had a spike. Very sensitive site, obviously with COVID throughout each of the occupants, but we worked together with our private sector housing colleagues, licensing, park homes, police, so that we could actually get in a safe environment into the site, see where it is, and our planning colleagues. And as a result of that, we've got a sort of task force which is working up the best for this premise site, but it's very, very sensitive for a number of reasons. But yeah, ourselves, committed to it, and we're very keen to work in partnership with everybody, whether it's around safeguarding, things like Wheel Duel, which again is another very topical site.
Thank you, Darling. Yeah. Right, moving on now. Next one to Dominic, please, if I may.
Yeah. So, how do we debrief and/or learn from lessons learnt through our protection activity, please?
I'm happy to take this one. We don't currently have a formal debrief process in place, again, which is something we could look at adopting, similar to what we've got with regards to operational incidents. But every prosecution case that we've done, we always have a case study afterwards, and we'll run through that prosecution case with all our fire safety officers. Prosecutions, it's not something we do that regularly, as you know, but any enforcement of any interest, or definitely prosecution, we will get all our fire safety officers together, run through those as a case study, so we can all learn from those, fire safety officers developing, and also enforcement officers who are taking those prosecutions. So, we did one for Penhallow through the Institute of Fire Engineers as well, which went national as well. So that wasn't just a regional learning, it was national learning from the Penhallow. We all legal case conferences to determine whether we will prosecute or we won't. And we've also got a quality assurance process in place where all our officers are quality assured. Again, areas for improvement, which we're now currently working on. So that's the kind of thing that we've currently got, but definitely areas for improvement with regards to the debriefing and learning moving forward.
Just as a matter of interest, did the recent fire at Trelisk throw up any surprises, or was it as you expected from your fire safety audits?
I was on leave at that time, so I'm not sure whether Stuart could expand on that. But
yeah, I can. Obviously, during the incident, there was some smoke travel. The fire was actually in the existing tower block. And again, we do focus very, very heavily on Trelisk Hospital, on all the hospitals. And I personally have done a number of inspections at the hospital. We followed up with an audit yesterday, so it wasn't myself, it was two qualified hospital inspecting officers that carried out the audit. I haven't had full report back from them, but we do have a very good working relationship with the hospital, and the amount of passive protection that they've put in the hospital over my sort of time with them, which has been about the last 5 or 6 years, it runs into the millions and millions of pounds. That's not to say that what happened last week should have happened. It shouldn't, but it is very difficult with the amount of technology that's gone into the building that was probably built in the early 60s, I would imagine. But they do have an excellent system for ensuring that any penetrations are made good. but I guess they're chasing their tail a little bit with it. But we can certainly feedback from you to you. The follow-up inspection was yesterday.
That would be really good. Thank you. Matt, next, please. Matt Luke.
Sorry, turn my button off again. Right. How do the objectives in the inquiry's terms of reference affect your respective organisation service?
Yeah, well, I think we really welcome it, and we really welcome the opportunity to work closer with yourselves, because you are the fire authority effectively, and we really want you to understand what we're trying to do, and be assured that we are working absolutely as hard as we possibly can, with limited resources and in a very difficult time. But exactly what we want to get out of this is for you to have confidence that we are focusing our efforts in the right areas in relation to the guidance that we've had. If there's subsequent guidance that comes out in the early part of 2021 as it's due to, that would be great, and we'll bring it back to yourselves and present to you, and be able to work up something that might look slightly different. But our economy is completely linked to the holiday trade, and increases from just over 500,000 to in excess of 1 million, which is why we focus very, very heavily on sleeping risk. That was evidenced as from the tragic hotel fire in Newquay, which I attended, and it was the worst night of my career. And that's really inspired me throughout since, that I don't want myself or anybody else to go through what we did that night. So I think hopefully you're getting some assurance that the integrated risk management plan and the risk-based inspection program that falls out of that, we're doing our best with our analysts and our business teams to get the best data to create something which will keep people safe throughout Cornwall, and we are confident that sleeping is really an area that we do want to keep our focus on.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you. The final question you'll be glad to hear is from John Simons.
Thank you. If you could put forward 3 or 4 recommendations to the inquiry that would support your service, what would they be, and importantly, why? I think you've half answered those, I think, before.
Dave, do you want to lead, and I'll chip in? Or
yes, I will. I think probably a common theme through the process this afternoon comes down to resources, funding, which again I fully appreciate. Everybody's in a similar situation across the council, and but that is one area that we'd like to see improvement. I think we've touched on career path protection. Again, we really need to establish that career pathway, better succession planning without a doubt, and because it will allow us to train officers for the future. We know when people are retiring. Let's start succession planning for that. That's probably it from me. A bit more collaboration with other agencies, again, which we're working on. Stuart's picked up. So I think it's not all about just asking for more funding resources, which we would all like. I think we really need to be a little bit smarter, a little bit cuter on how we deliver our protection activities. Look at doing things differently to what we've done before. Let's not just do what we've done previously. So I think there's a whole raft of things that we can do to support that, but ultimately it does boil down to the lack of resources, that we can't get to our high risk premises. Our risk-based inspections program is more based on the number of resources that we've got rather than the number of high-risk premises that we've got, which probably is not the right way around.
Mm.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, and we have mentioned it about developing a number of non-uniformed green book roles, and looking at how we can actually progress that throughout the service, because that would give us potentially more stability, and with that stability we can hopefully drive some better performance, and with that we would throw into that how we resource the primary authority role, which I think we all understand and get the benefits from working with business. We genuinely do, and that's what we want to support: successful, compliant business. That's what we're all about. And there's lots of hidden benefits that we do get from primary authority, but because we are very, very under-resourced at the moment, we are taking one of our multi-skilled staff and putting them into a very specialist role for a 12, 18 month, potentially 2-year period. So for myself, I think we really want to keep that going, but we could have a look at how we resource that role.
Thank you. That's been really interesting, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time. It's been great to hear from both of you, Dave and Stuart, and we do appreciate it. That is the end of the questioning to you. You are very welcome to stay with us if you would like to, but obviously we also understand that you are very busy people, so it's entirely up to you. But thank you so much for your help this afternoon. It's been really great to have you with us.
Thanks very much indeed. That was a pleasure. Thank you.
Now, colleagues, we're supposed to be having a 5-minute break. Do you need that, or we have already overrun by about 15 minutes? So do you need the 5-minute break, or should we just carry straight on with the ladies?
I'm easy.
You're easy. I think
to crack on.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, crack on. That'd be good.
Okay,
Thank you
okay by me. Yeah.
Thank you, darling. That's lovely. So
Chairman.
Yes.
I've been thinking. On Monday, when I attended the planning, the central planning, most of the people were a little bit confused why I was there, because I was obviously standing in for a substitute for Mary May. But today's a bit different. I am an actual member, so
you're a member. You're fine, darling. You're fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you're here in your own right. Thank you. Right, so if we move on then, welcome to Helen Turner and Sophie Coles. Lovely to have you here with us. So if we can start off with some questions for you two ladies, that would be really good. The first one's from me. Can you explain how your role and how you and the team support and inform the work of the protection team, please?
Yeah, I'll make a start on that, Councillor, if that's okay. So my role is as the business support manager for the service, and I have a small team of people who provide business support functions, shall we say, for the whole service, not just for the protection team. Sophie is one of the members of the team. Her role is specifically around pulling together data and looking at risk on behalf of the service. So collectively we support the protection team in providing data, intelligence, understanding of risk, etc. So hopefully that answers the question. Sophie, I don't know if you want to add anything into that.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm one of the analysts that work in the service. I primarily support the protection team. I produce the protection tool to help them identify premises that are unknown to them to inform their risk-based inspection programme. And I also produce the risk-based evidence profile each year, which provides a look at all of the risks across the whole service. So although I typically support the protection team, my role is quite varied, and I support other teams and managers across the service to understand their risks and allocate their resources.
That's interesting.
Good afternoon, ladies. Do you feel the support provided is sufficient to enable the protection team to deliver against the IRMP?
I'm happy to answer that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sophie. Sorry, I was just writing it down to make sure I didn't miss it.
So in terms of the work that I produce, the protection tool, we've looked at the regulatory reform order and the IRMP guidance note 4, and looking at that legislation, it asks for a risk-based inspection programme that prioritises premises based on risk to life. And that is what our protection tool does, and that is what we focus our resources on. So I feel confident that that tool is covering our duties in the legislation. We know that there's more if we had more capacity and resources, but I'm confident that those tools are covering the legislation and what's required of us.
Thanks. Did you have anything to add there, Helen?
No, I don't think so. No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, darling. Moving on, next one is Dominic, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Helpfully, Sophie, you just said you know that there's more you could do. So my question is, how could the support you provide be further improved?
think one of the areas looking at the Northwest model that we know that we could provide more information is around heritage risk. We know that there's more we could do around environmental risk, and also looking at premises that are of strategic importance to the county. There's more information that we could produce and provide to support Justin in how he allocates that resource. We've talked this afternoon about how they carry out those audits through sampling. But, you know, there are more sophisticated models that are out there that could be developed.
Thank you. So, Helen, I'm going to ask you, because Sophie has given us how we could improve back to the data side of it. But we've heard a lot today about things that Green Book employees could do. I take it you're both Green Book employees.
We are, yeah.
So are there
a
things
cheaper
beyond,
resource, yeah.
Are there things beyond the data analysis that do you think that Green Book employees could do to support the fire service?
Yeah, I think in terms of support aspect, you know, I think what we've got is a really good understanding of some of the data, and as Sophie's alluded to, I think, you know, we can spend, you know, time, energy, capacity, resources on understanding a greater breadth of data. I think for me, there's probably something around the process of how we translate the information from the data into a sort of a coherent inspection program. At the moment, I think we've got lots of bits of information that we try to pull together to, you know, to inform the priorities. I think there's probably something that, you know, it could be a Green Book employee, it could be, you know, anybody really with the relevant expertise. But I think, you know, in terms of improving the process of gathering the information and ranking, if that's the right expression, some of those variances to create that risk-based inspection program.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next question is from Matt Luke, please.
Right, okay. Well, okay. I think my question is a silly question because it's already been answered 3 times over by everybody. So I've got, do you and your team understand the work of the protection team? Of course you do. I don't know who came up with this question, sorry, but there we are. So I will put it a different way. Having worked with licensing a lot and seeing the services the licensing committee provide in setting up new businesses, helping them through all their licensing activities and so forth and whatever, they charge a fee for that because they provide a service. Could the fire service not do something on a similar scale, new businesses, hotels, restaurants, B&Bs, etc., you know, as in if people ring up and ask for questions, we could provide a little package and charge them a fee that would at least cover you guys in administration. I know, you know, it's a service we should be providing, like licensing, but they've had to go down the road where they can't do all this stuff for nothing because there won't be anybody to do it if they don't resource it. Is there something we could do in that, you guys could do in that sort of function?
I think probably the short answer is I don't think so. You know, I'm not an expert in the legislation in terms of applying the, you know, the legislation and the sort of statutory functions. As Stuart alluded to, you know, in the earlier session, protection activities is a statutory function, and you know, Sophie and I are paid employees of the service, and we provide our support services to Cornwall Fire and Rescue, you know, as part of our employment. So, you know, for me, I think it would be quite difficult to sort of separate out, you know, how you would create any kind of charging mechanism when essentially what Sophie and I are doing is supporting the delivery of that statutory function. It's not something we've explored, in all honesty, but that would be my sort of gut feeling. Yeah.
Okay, it was just a thought, you know, because the licensing system has to have. Alan simply can do it. Alan Hampshire might be the person to talk to. There might be. He's very cunning. He's a very cunning man. He might come up with some idea that some way round it somewhere along the line.
Yeah. That's meant as a compliment, isn't it? He is.
Yeah. I didn't mean it.
He is very good at
I didn't mean it in any declaratory fashion in any way, shape, or form. No, it complementary in all ways.
Exactly.
Okay,
right.
I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Matt. Moving on to John, please, next.
Yes, thank you. What changes could be made to improve the collaborative working relationship between your team and the protection team?
Yeah, Sophie, I don't know whether you've got something to I'm quite happy to go first, or I can chip in afterwards. Up to you.
You go first, Helen. I'll add to it.
All right, lovely, thank you. Yeah, I think we we do work quite well collaboratively across the service. I think there's always an issue of capacity is, I suppose, the biggest challenge. A lot of the work that my team do, we provide that sort of support function and a lot of the sort of collaboration and drawing things together, and Sophie provides that analytical expertise, but we can't do that on our own. We have to work with the the skills and expertise of the protection team, because they are the experts in that field. So we are very reliant on drawing all of that together to produce the tools and the the evidence that we do produce. So I suppose for me the biggest challenge we've got is that there is only a limited amount of capacity that the protection team have got to provide us with their time and their their knowledge and their skills in order to develop those products. Okay. Sophie, I don't know if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, just to echo what Helen's saying, we have capacity issues ourselves within the business support team. Protection is probably 20% of my workload. So it would be nice to allocate more resources and to spend more time if it was deemed that protection was a higher priority than the other things, but we would need to reprioritise our work and stop some of the other support and information that we're providing.
Okay. Thank you. Right, it's me next, and it's sort of fairly much on the same thing, really. Do you feel that the protection managers understand the role you and your team provide?
Yes, I feel that we have a good working relationship. I've worked with Justin to develop the protection tool. As Stuart and Dave has said, we're all very busy. It would be nice to spend more time with each other, seeing things through and communicating that really well down to the people on the ground. But with the capacity we have at the moment, I feel that we're doing a pretty good job with the resources that we have, and we have a pretty good working relationship as it stands.
Thank you. That's reassuring. I mean, we're proud of what you do as well. Right, moving on to Martin next, please.
Thanks, Chair. And actually, my next question, I think, capacity aside, because it's come across very strongly, obviously, that capacity is an issue. But are there any other barriers to the implementation of more accurate, up-to-date information and data for the community risk reduction strategy?
Yes, one of the recommendations that I was going to come on to at the end that you've asked us for, we really struggle with the IT and the software that we have. So as an analyst, I spend a lot of time looking at a little timer, my computer shutting down, a lot of time on the phone to IS, and with the problems that we have, we just don't have time to spend an hour on the phone to IS week in, week out. So I don't know whether it's an issue with the laptops or the software, but definitely there's more that we could do, and we could be more efficient if we had greater investment in IT and software.
Are you based in Torvadden, Sophie?
Yes. When I'm not in my loft, yes.
I was just wondering if, is it a Torvadden bandwidth issue or just your kit, do you think?
I don't think so. I don't know whether it's the laptops that we've got given, and it's also getting the good software. We know that there's software that's out there that would mean that we could provide information to managers on dashboards, but we need the time to invest in that, and we need the software and to get that up and running on our systems, really.
I just wanted to add to that, if I may. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think the other thing as well, it's sort of supporting Sophie's point really, is that an awful lot, probably most of what Sophie and the other analysts do on behalf of the service is done manually. There's a lot of pulling data out of systems, putting them into spreadsheets, doing, manual analysis. That's part of the challenge that Sophie and colleagues have with the laptops, is that they've got massive spreadsheets with enormous amounts of data, which obviously take up an awful lot of processing capacity. In terms of the machines. So, I do think that there's an element of, we are so reliant at the moment on that manual expertise that as well as the physical kit that we use and the how efficient those machines are at processing the enormous spreadsheets. I think there's also, there are other more sophisticated bits of software that we could probably use that would help take some of that manual work and one of the Sophie's colleagues refers to it as hand sewing, which is basically taking lots of different data sets and manually stitching them all together to create the overarching picture of all the different elements that you're trying to have a look at. There are pieces of software available by private companies that would do some of that for us, but again, it's investing the time and effort into what's available, what would we need it to do, what would provide the most value in terms of making us more efficient and therefore sort of freeing up capacity to look at things like a protection tool or a Northwest type model in much more detail.
Thanks, that's really useful. I think, Chair, that's something that we probably need to dig far deeper into in the coming days.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. Thank you very much for that, ladies. The next question is from Matt. And again, I think we've done the same thing. We've almost had the answer before you asked the question. But if you go ahead, it'll give them a chance to have a second bite at the cherry, Matt, please.
Yeah, well, I've got some IT kit I could send you girls. It would be very helpful. I've got a shed full of rubber mallets. I find them invaluable with anything IT. Anyway, joking
We'll bear
aside,
that in mind. Thank you.
well, free of charge. It could do with this. It could help with the stress management as well. Okay, so I think we've more or less answered this, but I'll do it anyway. How could Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service improve the collection of data and information used that will assist you in your role? Well, you've kind of answered that already. Better IT, so forth, and whatever. But other than the IT thing, is there anything else that you ladies think you and your teams could, use? Other than 10 more people in the background running around, in circles helping you.
Again, it's just the capacity and the software that we have.
Yeah.
Mm. And I think for me as well, there's so if we consider things like the Northwest model, they take into account an awful lot of different data sets. So what we don't understand at the moment is what data sets might be available that tell us about environmental risk, that tell us about heritage risk, or could inform those things. So I think there's an element of needing to understand what data might be available, how we would get hold of it, who manages it, that sort of thing as well, which could then sort of feed into a greater understanding.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Okay, Danny. Next one is from Dominic, please.
Okay, thank you. More on the same theme. We understand that the risk-based evidence profile informs the integration risk management plan and the risk-based inspection programme. However, can you explain what risk-based evidence profiling other fire and rescue services may use that would improve the information and data used for Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service, please?
Oh, can you say that question again, Dominic?
Yeah,
Sorry.
so the question is the second half. Can you explain?
That was a long question.
Yeah, so ignore the first half, which was just context. The question is, can you explain what risk-based evidence profiling other fire and rescue services may use that would improve the information and data used for Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service?
So the risk, shall I start on that, Helen? The risk-based evidence profile is the document that we produce every year, which explains to our senior management team what the key risks are for our service. And to support that, we run a series of workshops, which are called strategic assessment of risk workshops. which is a really thorough process which looks at all of the risks across the whole service, and we work with our managers to understand our capability, our capacity, and to assess the likelihood and also the harm of each of those individual risks. We are one of the first fire services to implement that. It's a model that we've borrowed from the police, and we've achieved kind of national recognition really for implementing that process, because it's accredited by the National Police Chiefs Councils. So it's a really good process that we use to help us understand our risks. So I think we're kind of leading the way with that. The area that we could apply to help us understand our risk to protection would be something like the Northwest model, but we're still waiting for the National Fire Chiefs Council to tell us if there is a national model that we should be following, or whether we'd be better to implement that. So also just to explain really that Northwest model, what that gives us that we don't currently have now is a more thorough understanding of the heritage risks, the operational risk to our firefighters, and the environmental risks that are specific to protection. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, no, I think so. We've got some background information about the Northwest model in our pack, so we can research that ourselves.
Thank you very much. Next question is from John, please.
Oh. Yes, thank you. What additional resources would be needed if Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service were to create and implement a new risk-based evidence module?
Yeah, I mean, I can pick that up, Sophie, if you like, in the first instance. It's something I've been thinking about actually in preparation for this, and the answer I've come up with is it's quite difficult to quantify. I think what we don't, what is not in question, I don't think, through the process of this inquiry and the conversations we've been having, is that we need more resource. I think if we were to look at something like the Northwest model, there would probably be an initial, requirement for additional resource, probably for about 3 months, particularly in terms of the analyst's time, to actually explore it, look at the data sets, develop it, quality assure it, test it, etc. And then there would be the ongoing maintenance. So from the point of view of the business support team, there would certainly be an upfront investment in resource required, followed by the identification of some level of maintenance of that sort of database, for want of a better word. There is also likely to be an impact on the protection team. So as I alluded to earlier on, we are very reliant on their expertise, their knowledge in terms of types of buildings. The Northwest model looks at sort of allocating scores based on, the type of premises and certain sort of attributes that those premises have, whether that's the number of people that sleep in them, whether it's, I don't know, the number of floors. There's I think there was about 47 different categories of attributes, so we would be very reliant on their expertise as well. So I think in terms of resources, we would certainly need to look at additional resources across both teams. At the moment, I find that quite difficult to quantify, because we haven't actually done any work to try and understand what we would need to do in order to develop that model in its entirety. Okay. Sophie, I don't know if there's anything you want to add?
I think you covered it.
Apologies if that doesn't answer the question, but yeah, I've been sort of thinking about it, and it's really hard to quantify.
No, I think that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you very much. The next question is from me. How does the evidence and data currently produced inform the risk-based inspection programme?
Sophie, I'm going to let you pick that up if that's all right.
Yeah, so each year as I said, we run these strategic assessment of risk workshops, which identify each of the risks and the priority that they take. And this year we've just completed the workshops, and for the first time non-domestic fires have come out as high risk. So when we were running those workshops, we found that this year the financial impact, so the financial impact on businesses, that score has gone up this year. And we had quite a lot of discussion around the pressures that businesses are under at the moment due to COVID. We know that 60% of businesses that have a fire don't recover. And that's part of the reason why non-domestic fires have gone up the ranking this year. And we've only just fed that back to our senior management team this morning. So we look at all of those risks. We understand which ones are the highest priority for us as a service. We feed that back to our senior management team. And then we structure our risk-based evidence profile, so our document, the analysis in there to help our service managers from the particular teams understand what they should be focusing on within those risks. So each year for protection, I will do some analysis to help them understand which premises are having the highest numbers of fires, where we're seeing the highest rates of fires. And then I start to break that information down for them so that we can understand. In hospitals, we typically see fires in lighting. So when you're doing your risk-based inspection program, these are the types of risks that you need to be talking to them about. In hotels, we typically see fires in kitchens or laundry rooms. So those are the particular areas of focus. So we try to provide as much information at a strategic level, but also at the kind of the level of the frontline staff who will be going and engaging with those businesses.
Thank you. That's really interesting, and it's nice to know how it's feeding in and being used. That's really good. Right, on next one is Martin, please.
Thanks. And my question kind of repeats the one that John asked earlier on, but instead of saying about implementing the new risk-based evidence model, it's about the risk-based inspection model. So really, it's about what additional resources would be needed if you were to possibly go down the route, for example, of the northwest model. But I guess your answer is the same as it was for John's question about the evidence model.
I think it is, Councillor. Yes, sorry.
Okay, right. Thank you for that one. Now it's Dominic, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this question is going to sound strange, but that's because we're asking it for all witnesses, regardless of which organisation they come from. So how do the objectives of the inquiry's terms of reference affect your respective organisation stroke service?
I haven't got the objective. In terms of reference to hand,
I
sorry.
can answer that.
Thank you. I'm just reminding myself what the.
I would be very keen to hear members' views on how we improve our approach, given the capacity and the resources that we have, and if you feel that there's a better model or something else that we should be doing with the capacity that our team and the workload that we have. I'd be really keen to get your advice on that and how we can improve.
Thank you, darling. Have you found the terms of reference,
Helen? I did, yes. Sorry, I needed to remind myself of what the objectives were. Yeah, and I think for think for me, exactly as Sophie said, a really clear steer in terms of what you think we could do better and how we might resource that. And I think for me, sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought. I think for me as well, it's about sort of understanding. Are you satisfied with the way that we provide the data, that the type of data that we're providing, how that feeds into an inspection program? Are we focusing our efforts on the right areas, or do you think there's things that we're missing that we should be incorporating in that information we're providing to protection managers and enabling them to sort of focus on some different areas? Sort of example being, I know Dave, when he spoke about it earlier on, we were talking about we focus our efforts on sleeping risk because that's that's historically what we know is an issue. I think what we're starting to get now is a better understanding of emerging trends and risks. So particularly around things like agricultural premises, around industrial premises, they would traditionally fall much lower down in the sort of rankings. So it's really a steer on whether you think that that's okay and whether we should be maybe looking at those trends a bit more dynamically. And looking at additional resources to cover some of those as well.
Thank you, darling. Final question, you'll be glad to hear us from Matt.
Okay, and this is for you guys to think about really as well. If you could put forward 3 or 4 recommendations to the inquiry, to us, that would support your organisation, stroke services, teams, you know, whatever you want to call yourselves, what would they be? And importantly, why? You might want to have some time to think about that, but just off the
I've got
top
a
of your
little
heads,
list.
ladies.
Yeah.
I've got
No,
a little list actually that I've written down as we've been going
Yeah.
through this afternoon's process.
Rubber hammers, chocolate.
Yeah,
So-
some mallets out of Councillor Luke's shed. No, in all seriousness, I think we have covered these, but I'm quite happy to sort of go through them again. I think for me, there's a real a real need to look at our IT, both the hardware, and the capacity of our IT, as well as considering investment in sort of software options to take out some of that manual, our reliance on sort of manual processing.
Yeah.
I think resources obviously is we need to be considering whether or not we are comfortable with the resources we've got and how that sort of supports our ability to deliver the requirements of the protection function, the sort of statutory function. I think for me, both of those things would then help us to identify or release capacity to investigate data in more detail, alternative data sets, what have partners got, how could we potentially create something like a Northwest model that gave us a much more I can't think of what it's much more sort of comprehensive set of data which we could then help the protection team understand and inform their risk-based evidence profile, and again in terms of sort of the release of capacity to support that collaboration across the two teams.
Yeah.
So those were the things I'd sort of scribbled down, as we've been talking this afternoon.
Thank you, darling. That's really good. Can I thank both of you, Helen and Sophie, very much for your time. It's been brilliant to hear from you this afternoon and to actually see your dear faces too. Helen, we see quite often, but we've not met. So I've not met Sophie before, so it's nice to have you with us. And thank you. I know how busy you are, so we're really grateful for your input this afternoon as well. Thank you, my loves. And you're welcome to thank you. You're welcome to stay with us if you want to, but I know how busy you are, so if you need to go as well, that's also okay. So thank you, and been really helpful. Colleagues, I'm going to suggest a 5-minute break now. So it's 3:05 by me. So if we can come back again at 3:10, please, and move on then to the Cornwall Council officers. So we've caught up time, which is brilliant. So if we can have a 5-minute break now and see you again at 10:10, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Chairman, it's Jo Heather. If I could just
Yes.
mention that the recording of the meeting will continue. So if everybody could turn their cameras off and mute their microphones, please, until we come back in 5 minutes' time.
Thank you.
Are you going to do a roll call before we get started again? just in case someone's got themselves locked in the loo.
Another minute to go yet, so I'll hang on a second.
It's a fair old trek for me to get from my garden office into the
sorry,
house,
darling.
all the way back in 5 minutes.
Mine's right next door, so it was ideal for me. Right, it is now 3:10. I wonder if we can make sure everybody is back. I think Matt, John, Dominic, are you all here with us? I can see Justin is, and Joe is back with us. Yeah, John is there. Lovely job. Matt, are you back with us? Matt, Luke? No, possibly not for a minute. Joe, are you back with us, love?
Yes, yes, I am. I was just looking for our next set of witnesses. We are 5 minutes early, so it may be that Joe Roberts and Chris Stanbury are going to join in a moment. Angie is here.
Yeah, I can see Angie, so I'll just check in a minute. I don't think Joe Roberts or Chris Stanbury are here yet, are they?
I don't think so. I'll just message them quickly.
Thank you, sweetie. Angie, welcome to you, my love. You've been with us for the whole meeting so far, I think, haven't you? Hi, Matt. Chris Stanbury's now with us. Welcome. And Joe, it's the other one, Joe Roberts we're waiting for, aren't we? Is Joe here with us yet?
I have just sent a message to him, Chairman.
Lovely. We've got Chris with us now and Angie.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi there. We're a little bit early, so we're missing one witness at the minute. So if we just hang on. Oh, there's Joe.
John's just online.
Lovely job. We're all here now. That's brilliant. So if we can make a start again then. Welcome. Thank you very much to Joe Roberts, Angie McGinn and Chris Stanbury. It's lovely to have you here with us this afternoon. Very grateful to you for taking the time to come and join us. We've got some questions for you, if we may, please. And I'm not sure who wants to answer them, but perhaps if you can do sort of the three of you, you could all answer it, or each question, or if there's one that's more particularly for one of you than the other, then that's up. We'll leave it up to you who answers them. Okay. So the first question is from John Simons, please. You're muted, John.
Sorry. This is for Joe. Can you explain a collaborative working relationship between Cornwall Fire Service and the private sector housing, please?
Yeah, certainly. Afternoon, everybody. So I'd introduce myself. So Joe Roberts, Head of Private Housing in Cornwall Council. So I look after a service, primarily environmental health officers, responsible for housing standards in privately rented accommodation in Cornwall. So it's important you understand that. So that means that we intervene and help people with their housing conditions, and we also license shared housing in Cornwall to make sure it meets relevant standards. And that's relevant because we have a duty to inspect, and we look at what would be a range of hazards in the home that present to us, and one of those hazards is fire safety. So we have a strong link to fire safety, and that link then moves us towards engagement with the fire service. So we some time ago, gosh, what was it, 10 years ago, Justin, I'm sure, met with fire service colleagues and realized that there was a piece of legislation that was intertwining with ours, the Regulatory Reform Order, and there was a need for us to intervene jointly and coercively to make sure that we met standards between us. So if I was to give an example, that would be a house that was a flat in a commercial block that had commercial activity and private activity, residential sleeping above it, and there was a link between our relevant legislation, and we needed to find the best way to make that work. So we formed a partnership, a protocol agreement that really drove towards improving that, and to make sure that we intervened correctly, effectively, and achieved the outcomes that we wanted to do. So that's been in operation for 10 years, been very successful. And we're looking now to drive that forward into a new area where we're looking at properties of different heights, stories, to look at risk in a different way. And that's it. But primarily, we've been working very closely, successfully with the fire brigade. We've had some comments into the team from the fire service to make sure that we adequately resourced the partnership arrangement and that it met the targets and aims of its original ambitions. That's a rough summary. It's quite complicated. So if there's any particular areas you want me to go into more detail, then please do say.
Okay. We may sort of pull them out with the questioning as we go through, Joe. Is there anything else you wanted to come back on, John Simons?
No, that's nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, the next question is from me, if I may. Can you each tell us in turn, so I'm going to make all three of you work this time, whether you feel the current working relationship assists you in delivering your respective service objectives and priorities? So shall we go to ladies first? Perhaps go to Angie first and then come to the two gentlemen. Hi, Angie. You're muted, darling.
Yeah, I am now. Yeah, too many buttons, isn't there? Yeah, in terms of the reference-wise, I think obviously, I think like from Joe and everyone, they're kind of more housing and it is more sort of fire orientated, whereas with licensing, we tend to work with the fire brigade kind of side by side because they've got regulatory reform order. Our legislation's got sort of crime and disorder. So I think with that, it's kind of we more coordinate and work together, but under our own legislation. But we try and do it in a coordinated way as initial sort of comments. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, so in terms of reference-wise, their risk assessment or risk-based is theirs, and we have our own kind of thing based on sort of crime and disorder and other matters. So, that's just an initial sort of comments.
Right, thank you. Can I come to Chris next, please?
Yes, certainly. So just, I guess, quickly to summarise, obviously the building control process, which I'm involved with as part of the council's building control service, we are one of a number of providers in the marketplace, so we're an unusual part of the council in the sense that we are in a commercial marketplace for the building control work that we deal with, and people can elect to use approved inspectors for work if they choose. So some people aren't aware of that. So building control, we're a strange service in the sense that we are part of the council. We have statutory functions, but we are also competing commercially with other providers. What I would say, our fundamental relationship with the fire service initially is a statutory one. So if a building is also a premises under the fire safety order, we are obliged to consult the fire service formally as part of dealing with the building regulations application, and it also dictates that you use a certain type of application when you come to building control. Similarly, the approved inspectors, the private inspectors, if you like, are obliged to do something very similar via a slightly different method. In a way, that used to be our main contact with the fire service, but certainly in the last 10 years, and I will say this, sorry Justin, but I'm going to say it, this has been largely encouraged by Justin and his team, and I've got to say they've done a massive amount of work to encourage and facilitate this over the last 10 years, and particularly even more so since the Grenfell Tower fire. Our relationship with the fire service has never been closer, and that's both on a sort of an organisational level, but also on a personal level between officers. So I'm one of the managers of the building control service, and the bit that I specifically look after is the plan checking side of it. So it's assessment of projects on paper and pre-application advice and engagement and all of those kind of things that are outside the specific visiting things on site. And I started writing a list of things that we've done over the last 4 to 5 years, and it's a long list. And I also sit regionally. LABC is the umbrella organisation under which building control sits nationally, so they represent building control departments within councils nationally. And I sit on I'm the vice chair of the Southwest Group, and I also sit on the National Council of LABC in terms of the governance side of it. And it's something I'm always incredibly proud to shout about, to be honest, because being a unitary council, it makes our relationship incredibly strong, and we are as ahead of the game as you can be in that relationship compared to others in the country, because it's easier for us to be, and because we've done a lot of the work to break down barriers, egos. I think 10 years ago, I think it would be true to say that my colleagues were scared of the fire service, and weirdly they were scared of us. But I think that's completely gone, and I'm very proud to say that, because that's no easy thing to do in a professional world, dealing with architectural practitioners who naturally have an ego, and people who get uniforms and all of those things. And so the sort of specifics, I've got a bit of a list, so bear with me, I'm just going to refer to these just to give you a sort of an overview. So really, as an immediate result of the Grenfell Tower fire, we were out with the fire service the next day pretty much. Justin led on that, looking at those buildings that we were concerned might be in the zone, if you like, of being of a particular concern, high-rise type buildings. The fire service facilitated that. They provided the uniform to chivvy the building owners to do something, and we provided the technical understanding and expertise to understand what we were looking at. Since then, we realised really there were a couple of conversations after those initial responses, and we realised that there's so many things we could be doing together better and differently. So that includes joint training. We've been on a sprinkler course arranged by the fire service, so we can sort of understand what we're asking for, to be honest, and the difficulties of that in some cases and the practicalities of that. We regularly shared CPD events with external providers, so people who provide systems and those kind of things, so we can both understand how they work and what they do. We regularly have informal conversations about technical stuff. The fire brigade will say, we've done an audit, there's this thing, we don't get what it is and how it works. Can you help us with that so we can understand what we're looking at? They help us with change of structures. Obviously, they have high reach appliances and a sort of very quick response. So in situations where we need to deal with a dangerous building in weather like this, where our framework contractor can't get up that high, or can't mobilise the equipment to do that, fire brigade, we have an arrangement to facilitate that, and the list goes on. I mean, it's really great, and it's something I'm very proud of, and I want to really highlight that as hard as I can do, because when I go other places in the country, other building control, even council building control providers, in many cases are nowhere near that. I'd say some of the inner city ones are, because they've had to be because of the number of high-rise buildings they've got. But other rural authorities just aren't in that position. And as I say, I really have to take my hat off to Justin and his team, because they've really driven that, I'd say. And you've probably driven it more than we have, if I'm honest, Justin. So so we're very grateful for that. So I don't know if that kind of covers the question, but
thank you, Danny. Yeah, well, we may have more opportunities for you later on as we're going down through them, but thank you for that. That's good. And Joe, can I come back to you again, please?
Sure. I'd echo a lot of what Chris was saying there, in that, coming back to the protocol agreement, that really brought our services together. The unitary, bringing to the unitary helped that position, but it really brought our services together. So we really considered what the right powers were to use at the right time to tackle issues that were coming forward. So we have been working closely. So we do have an understanding of our service demands. And I think the question really related to, does the partnership really meet my area of service demands and needs? And that would be, to assist tenants and those in shared accommodation to live safely and to remove risk from where they live. And one of those risks being fire safety, along with a lot of other risks involved with housing, but fire safety clearly being a key one because of its risk to life attached to it. So I would echo what Chris was saying. So we have been really driving towards improving that over time through the placements, the comments, and looking at it. So the direct answer to the question is yes, the partnership arrangement we put in place really does help us to deliver on our joint aims in relation to that. But I think we could develop it further.
Thank you. That's really good. Well, thank you to all three of you. It's heartening to hear that. Next question is from Martin, please.
Thanks. And actually, my question leads nicely on from that last question, and because it's on that theme of collaboration. And I wonder if you could suggest how that collaboration between your respective services and the fire and rescue services could perhaps be improved in any way.
Yeah, I'll happily go ahead if that's all right.
Yeah, lovely.
Joe. Yeah, so I think what we've always had a thirst between us, Justin and others, to try and make sure that we are assessing risk properly and we are directing our what very limited resource we both have towards where it's most needed. So that would be my primary, request there, in that we both really want to see that we're actually tackling those properties that are exhibiting the highest risk to their occupiers. And for me, it really boils down to our understanding the quality of the data we hold, and does it really lead to successful determination of risk? And does it take us to the right places? So some of these questions we've been trying to raise ourselves, and they're difficult to crack. So once we have the data, the quality of it is of key importance, and how we then collect it. But then really our ability to interrogate that data, to join it with other data sets, to then inform our decision making and where we direct our resource. So that's really where I think where we could develop the collaborative working, to make sure that we then use our partnership, the skills, relationships that we've built over the last 5 to 10 years, to then start targeting it in the most effective way where it's needed in Cornwall.
Thank you. Chris, can I come to you next, please?
Yeah, you can. I'm glad you asked the question. Thank you, Martin. I think a lot of the things we've done have been kind of the easy, quick win things. And they create a great place to move forwards from, because you haven't got those ego personality issues to work through, because you've done that. And I said this at the fire service peer review, that the fire service in Cornwall, and the same for building control really, we're all wearers of many hats, and jugglers of hats, not least wearers of the hats. And you get to a point where you actually start to need to do detailed, sit-down, complicated work about complicated subjects, and this is really, if nothing else, driven by the Grenfell Tower fire and the Building Safety Bill, which will fundamentally change the world of building control and the fire service in their role to do with new buildings and the management of newly constructed and existing buildings, in fact. Now, that work is forensically complex. Grenfell Tower has shown that you can now be in the dock justifying pretty much how many screws are in a fire door and whether you checked how many screws should have been in the fire door hinge, because that might be the difference between it being a fire door and not a fire door that lasts for the requisite period of time. So our work in building control has gone from often being sort of relatively light touch to now forensically complex stuff. And just want to paint a little example of this. My partner owns a flat in Worcestershire, and we've identified that the flat front doors are of 1980 standards and have nice letterboxes cut through all of them. So they're not particularly good as a fire door. So we've been looking to replace them, and I've been helping the management organisation to do that. Just when you go to Howden's and get a fire door, you say, can I have the fire test for this fire door? And for 4 fire doors that they might have wanted, every one of them has a questionable fire safety certificate. The fire tests associated with those fire doors have changed within the last few months. Some of them would suggest they've been tested in a furnace. Some of them actually haven't been tested in a furnace, so technically don't comply with UK standards. And really, you can look at it and go, well, yeah, it's a fire door because it's got the right number of hinges. But when you get into that forensic level of detail, you find out that the fire door isn't a fire door, actually, even though the person that's selling it thinks it is. And that can be the thing you're having to defend in court or try and explain to an architectural practitioner who's never looked at a fire certificate before, let alone understood one. And really, we're at the point now where we need to do work to explore some of those challenges. And therefore, it boils down ultimately to resource and time. But not just resource and time, it's people with knowledge. And if it takes, for me to gain the level of fire knowledge I have, which is not a massive level, but it's a fairly competent level, that's 10 or so years in the profession doing constant learning with a good degree behind you. and you can't acquire that knowledge and experience quickly. So I think in the fire service are in a very similar position, that it's not just having bums on seats, it's having bums on seats that know what they're doing, and can prove their competency and are up to date. And that's our challenge, because you can't magic that out of nowhere. So it's a resource issue, but it's also the type of resource and the time you have to get into things to the level you need to get into them. Not only to check somebody else is doing, but to check you understand it yourself, because things change so quickly. And it's always the case. The devil is in the detail. I can't tell you how to easily fix that, but I would say that's, and we're trying to do some work with the fire service to maybe second one of our surveyors into the fire service to help them with their work, but also to help us with how we implement the building safety bill. And just trying to find a person who's got the knowledge, but you can spare because you're still doing the day job, it is almost impossible. And we've just tried to recruit somebody in building control. I'm sure the fire service have a similar problem. Because of the pay differential in Cornwall, ultimately, we got 4 applicants after national advertising. Actually, only one of them was suitable and turned up for interview. Luckily, it was a good candidate, and luckily it happened to be somebody locally that we've stolen back from the private sector. But we were lucky to get that even. So we have got this kind of gap. And when you've got the new Homes Ombudsman trying to staff themselves, you've got the building safety regulator trying to staff themselves. There's no prizes for guessing where they'll be stealing people from that have the knowledge to do that. So if I was to say what the challenge is going forward, it's that. It's people with the knowledge to be able to take it forwards. So sorry for the...
No, it's interesting to know that. Angie, did you want to come back on this one?
Yeah, sure. In relation to sort of collaboration, like I've said before, it's difficult, isn't it? Because we work alongside each other on our own legislation, but we do cross over quite a bit. So, as examples, we've got an event safety group in our service that's led by our service, and the fire brigade are part of that. So that's looking at safe events. We have regular meetings with enforcers for licensed premises. So we call it a responsible authority meeting. So that's the police, fire brigade. So we collaborate there on cases that are coming up, so that we're trying to deal with premises as a whole, but obviously we've got under our own legislation. And recently we've now got, I worked with Joe on this, a single point of contact for park home residents. There's a corporate group on that, which the fire brigade are on as well. So it's all about, where we've got an enforcement issue, dealing with it multi-agency, coordinated, but at the same time, it's sort of planning the work around, because we've got lots of licensing policies as well, which obviously fire brigade and other services have an input into, and lots of applications that come in, we consult the fire brigade on as well, Cornwall Fire and Rescue. So for us, we try to, like I say, coordinate activities per premises, if you like, and work together, and it's forming policies and everything, and we know where to go to if we need help, because like we said, we're not the experts in fire, but we know who to go to and where to get that from. And again, I'd support kind of instance going unitary as well. We know obviously we've been brought closer to that, obviously in our unitary authority, and it's just other things on collaboration. We have vehicle roadside checks for taxis. They let us use the fire stations for that, and it's just great. Yeah, so it's working alongside, but knowing what each other's doing.
Brilliant, thank you, Darren. That's really helpful.
Can I just comment quick?
Yes,
sorry,
Mark, of course.
It's really on something that Joe's said at the beginning about one of the challenges being around data, and bearing in mind that you're all Cornwall Council and the fire service is Cornwall Council. Do you have any shared databases? And if not, would it help if you did have?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a complicated area, and no, we have our individual databases, and they're not shared in relation to the fire brigade and private sector housing. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't use data sets to talk to each other. So I think one of the challenges we've been what I was trying to draw out was that to get to the right places that we need to get to, we really need a handle on that data, the quality of it going in, and how we access it once it's in there, and share it and apply and align it with other data sets to give us the best intelligence picture we can find. So the direct answer to your question is no. The Cornwall Fire Brigade have a system called CFRS, I believe, and we have a program called Audits, all of which requires extensive knowledge and work to work with, to put the data in, manipulate it and extract it via reports, etc. But they're all separate. And therein lies one of the challenges that I've been wrestling with Justin for some time, to see how we can best use those data sets. And the honest answer is it's a challenge, because it's a detailed area of work, and these databases are bought in. They're not developed in-house. So it requires an awful lot of resource to work with them, change them, adapt them, mold them to how you want them. So you pick up on a very relevant area, which is why I raised it, really, because the key to us going to where we need to get to is to use our data correctly, in my mind, so that we can really move to a model that's really an intelligence-led intervention. Would be what I would suggest was something I'm striving for in private sector housing work, and I'll give you an example of that if you would like. So, in relation to intelligence-led, I mean applying a range of data sets to give you the best picture you can, to make sure that we proactively intervene in areas where we think there are issues. So we recently secured some funding from the government to purchase a housing stock database produced by the Building Research Establishment that really starts to give us a property-based picture of that sort of information. So we do know where there are likely to be hazards in the home. We know where there are likely to be issues of fuel poverty, and that we know a lot more. So we can now start to think about targeting our limited resource.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe. I think, Chair, I think that really picks up on something that our previous session highlighted as well. So maybe for our wrap-up session.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I just add something to that?
Yes, Chris. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm trying to work.
No, that's fine. In building control and planning, we are also a customer of IDOCS, so the database is a sort of massive thing with various modules. Unfortunately, you don't have a lot of choice when you procure these databases, particularly if you want one that has modules for 4 or 5 or 6 different services with different needs. What I would say is, as a user of IDOCS, the software behind it is ancient. The front end that makes it sort of usable is being stretched beyond its capabilities, really. To get it to email out more than one attachment at a time is sort of asking for black magic. And unfortunately, providers like IDOCS, because they tend to have cornered the marketplace, they're really not interested in making it work for you.
Yeah.
They'll give you what they want you to have, not what you need. And again, this isn't a pop at IDOCS, but it is. Especially there are a few alternatives, is the truth. But we're at a point as well where there's things we want to do with it that we can't, because it just can't do that and won't do that, and IDOCS are not interested in making it do that. And it actually gets to a point that becomes the bottleneck in moving forwards, because you're really dealing with technology that's 15, 20 years almost out of date and very labour intensive and very clunky. So I know that's a slightly broader issue, but I think it's a valid issue when you look at the unitary council.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry for taking so long on that.
No, Martin, that's fine. And as you say, this was raised in previous witnesses of a similar sort of problem with the ITs. Yeah, thank you for that. Dominic, next, please.
Okay, thank you. So my question leads neatly on to this from this. So perhaps we'll start with Angie this time. Can you tell us currently how you share relevant risk information between yourself and the Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service?
I don't think on the licensing time initially, sort of share our risks. It was probably because we've got different risk-based systems. That might be down to the different legislation and the different requirements. So there isn't a sharing. We've probably got separate risk-based schemes, if you like. But the collaboration sort of comes, when we get applications in or cases, and then we talk individually on each one.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Essentially, the building regulations isn't really driven by risk. So risk isn't the factor. We generally deal with most buildings based on the sort of worst case expected use. So really the workings of the building regulations was never written specifically around risk assessment in any way. There are some technical standards which bring that in a fire context, but that's more about how you manage the building as a building user. I suppose the overlap would be if we've checked the design of a building based on a stated level of management, and we've used a design standard that's based around designing your building to fit that level of management that the owner or builder is saying is going to be employed. I guess where it could fall down is that if the fire service aren't aware of that when they're doing an audit, you could look at a building and not really know that the design was based on a certain level of management. And if that level of management wasn't there, how would you know that increased the risk, I suppose? So there is, I guess, a bit of a loophole, but those are technical design standards which are used rarely. And you would generally only use them for more complex buildings. So typically something like a shopping centre, like Drake Circus in Plymouth, where it's a very cleverly designed building and management is a fundamental basis of how it's designed. But for a building of that size, you would typically expect that narrative to follow through to the management and fire safety management plan for the building. So it is unusual, but it will increase as time goes on, as fire safety becomes more technology based rather than passive doors and things like that based.
Okay, thank you. And Joe?
Okay, so in the housing area, in the Housing Act 2004, really it does define some properties as higher risk in my area, and they would be shared housing of 5 more individuals sharing facilities, and there's accepted there's a heightened fire risk in such terrains, and that, as such there's a licensing regime that applies to them. So and then as part of that regime, our licensing process, we're under duty to consult with the fire brigade, and we do so. So that I would suggest that is a strong link between us in relation to identification and sharing of what would be perceived to be our highest risk properties. So that's a formal process between us that we use. But clearly the relationship we've built up over time has led us to contact the fire brigade where we believe it's necessary, and we understand the range of the regulatory reform order and the range of the Housing Act, and where there are grey areas we know we need to work jointly. So we would make referrals between us at that point on a reactive basis to achieve to make sure that we're doing the best we can to either secure compliance or remove hazards and dangerous situations from dwellings, really. So that would be my answer to that question.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We now move on to Matt, please.
Hi, everyone. Okay, can you each tell us whether you see the overlapping of legislation as a barrier to enforcement? I think Angie's kind of answered that to a certain point, and having worked with the licensing quite a lot, I know what she means on that side of it. And as for risk, as in Joe was saying, I think the biggest risk area in my patch, speaking differently, is park homes. I think they're kind of falling out of the scale a little bit, and but that's something we could talk about another day, I think. So yeah, I'll start with Angie, but I think she's already kind of covered herself really there.
Yeah, I think that there is different legislation, but I suppose it depends on the issue. It's making sure there is a bit of legislation there that will let you deal with the issue.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I know you gave park homes as an example, but you know, that's kind of, whilst we in the licensing team license them, and we've got the compliance team that check against the conditions of license, they can't check anything in relation to fire safety because that comes under the regulatory reform order. There's things like electrics, well, that's the Health and Safety at Work Act, you know. So I think it comes back to this collaboration thing. You know, when you've got an issue, you know, the premises is identifying what they are, what bit of legislation can deal with it, and then sort of working together on it, you know, to make sure that you're using, you know, the right elements. And I think, you know, with some of it, sometimes there's not just that legislation, because there are licenses as well. Whilst you might be able to do with the enforcement, it might be prosecution or improvement notice. Ultimately, you can also then look at potentially reviewing licenses as well, which is, you know, a different you know, part of it as well. So I think it is just sort of knowing the bits of legislation and using the right bit to achieve what you need to do in a you know, together, really, in a coordinated way.
I don't know who wants to answer that next, Joe.
I'll go. Yeah. So, well, perhaps perversely, the ill-written legislation, the Housing Act and the Regulatory Reform Order, has served a purpose to bring us together. So, and in that context, I would suggest that it's potentially a good thing, because if we work well together and we apply the right power between us, we have a far wider range of powers. So it's not necessarily a negative. It's just making sure that we join together appropriately and use the right power at the right time, and we don't jointly investigate waste resource, end up conflicting through, because it is of that nature. Maybe if I need to give you an example, I really do, so you can picture it in your mind. Okay, if you take a takeaway premises with the stairs coming down into the kitchen area that goes up into a flat that's got 5 or 6 people bedding down in it, sleeping. And that sort of premises covers both of the Regulatory Reform Order and the Housing Act 2004. So those are the sort of premises where we really need to work together and see when we get there, because each premises is different when you get there and when you actually undertake an audit or an inspection, as we call them, how you then work together to apply the most appropriate power to safeguard the people living in the dwelling. Now, there's wider people to be involved, but that gives you an indication of where we're at. So not necessarily a negative thing, but it's so important for us to work together to apply the right power to achieve what we want to, because you can come unstuck by one person's actions undermining that of another, and that's not a position we want to get in, which is why the partnership is such a successful thing that we want to see grow and develop.
Good.
Okay.
Chris?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things there. So again, following on from what Joe was saying, in a way, sometimes the gaps in the legislation actually create an opportunity, because you can do better than what the legislation would have said if it had existed. So in Joe's takeaway situation, say that came to building control for a new extraction system, or I don't know, new shop front or something or other being put in, we might see the plans and we'd say, well, hang on, we're only actually dealing with the shop front here, and the building control remit is, but do you know you've got a really dangerous premises? And having an awareness of what other services would say about that. So look here, you know, have you had an audit by housing? Have you had an audit by fire service? Because you've got a bad arrangement here. And while we're dealing with stuff, you know, here's some options for fixing the problems you've got. So you can be it gives you in one way an opportunity to be proactive. The danger in our world is being in a competitive marketplace. You can scare people away by being proactive because they look for somebody who isn't, and you know, go somewhere where they won't mention that and we'll just look at the shop front. But we don't see that as a benefit. We see that as a, you know, like if they want to be a cheapskate, then go elsewhere. We'd rather discuss the issue and at least them be aware of it, if not do something about it. But then you get areas where the legislation gets very complicated. So what I'm going to mention, and Justin will probably groan at this point, is holiday lets and paying guest accommodation. It's a regular point of topic conversation between our services at the moment. So a holiday let, a dwelling being used as a holiday let would be a bog standard dwelling under building regs, but we know that the RRO will impose significant uplift requirements on that. But the guidance in legislation is crap, to put it bluntly, if not woolly at best, and is a zone of flux. So it's really hard to try and broker effectively solutions to other people's legislation that sits above and beyond yours when the guidance is difficult to actually work with, or it's difficult for architects or whoever to pin down the guidance to actually what they actually need to do to fix it. And that's where, you know, it's difficult. You have to take people's perception of risk assessment beyond fire blankets and fire extinguishers into fire doors and walls and layouts, and some of them just don't get that. And to put that in context, I've stayed in 10 Airbnbs in the last 3 years, and not one of them complied, in my opinion, anything, not in Cornwall, I should highlight, outside Cornwall. I don't stay in ones in Cornwall for a very good reason, but not one of them has complied with building regulations as a dwelling, let alone any uplift under RRO. So to give you an idea of how poor most holiday let accommodation is, when you've no idea of the physical capability of the people staying in there to self-escape. And then on another side of that, you've got the building safety bill, or draft building safety bill, which very definitely ends to close those gaps for complex buildings. but in a way, we're not sure really how much they'll touch lower complexity buildings. So if you have a lot of high-rise buildings, they're going to get rid of the gaps in the legislation. On lower risk buildings, it's hard to see how long it will take for that legislation to filter down into a behaviour across the industry. So it works in some places, but it hinders you in others.
Thank you very much, all of you. Yeah.
I didn't know if Justin wanted to offer anything else up as well.
No, Matt. Justin is here as an advisor. He's not.
Okay, all right.
Right, moving on. Then the next one is John Simons, please.
Yes, thank you. I think mine follows on from that, but I think my question's been touched upon as well slightly. But can you tell us how the overlapping of the relevant legislation is managed and coordinated?
Okay, yeah, I think it's probably best place to have a crack at that one.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah.
So so it was recognised at an early stage. I mean, the key one, I think there may be others, but the key one in my mind is the Regulatory Reform Order and the Housing Act 2004. So and the crossover I've been talking about. So it was recognised at an early stage. We brought about a protocol agreement between us to bring us together to try and iron out what would be any issues between us that would stop us from achieving our common goal of fire safe property at the end. So we developed within that the need to train, to work together, to highlight potential cases where it was a joint approach needed, not just a single organization or single team working on it. Identified types of categories of properties where one service should probably normally take the lead through discussion, but so we had some sort of clear roadmap looking forward as to how we tackled individual cases coming forward, and in doing so we mitigated the risk of jointly enforcing and undermining each other's actions by doing so, wasting resource and all the other associated problems with what were created by the duplications in the regulations and legislation, really. So yeah, so there's a long answer to that, but yeah, basically it was recognized at early stage. We've been working on it, we're still developing it, and we're hoping to develop it further in the future to look at what are perceived now to be areas of risk in our housing stock, 3, 4, 5-story properties. So not really high level properties, but properties of a higher than normal height, where there may be elevated risk to those because of distances of travel, likelihood that they're potentially multiply occupied, connections to commercial premises and complications with access, those areas.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Chris or Angie, have you got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think some of that I've answered kind of. There's quite a few different licensing functions that we deal with, don't necessarily all sort of cross over with the Cornwall Fire and Rescue, but you know, the legislation things and working together, it's where we've got, you know, the event safety group where we're looking at events, it's the responsible authorities meetings, the park home group. There's all these corporate groups that we're on to make sure we can, you know, work together with the legislation and kind of do that together. But they're sort of like corporate meetings, but then you've got then individual cases whereby you'll have case officers and like licensing compliance case officers will speak to a relevant, you know, fire safety officer and collaborate locally on each one. But you've got the corporate groups then, if you like, that bring that all together and make sure that we're all working together.
Thank you, darling. Chris, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, very quickly. I think the challenge is understanding each other's legislation. So a good example would be a house in multiple occupation. If it's a smaller house in multiple, I'll call it a HIMO for short, the building regs may deal with it one way or treat it at one level. The Housing Act may risk assess it at a different level, and the RRO may risk assess it at a different level again, using a different sort of way of assessment. And so things like that can be very tricky because you've got to try and perceive how two other services might, or two other pieces of legislation more critically, might judge that building and what they might require of it. And because we're in a position where we're trying to get something that fixes all of it on the plan so we can approve it and they do the right thing in practical terms, rather than do one thing and then find they need to go back and do something else. That can be challenging, but I guess the way around that is to understand how each other's systems work. So at least you've got a pretty rough idea of what's likely to be required, and
Mhm.
sometimes then boiling that down into tangible physical things that need doing to fix it. But essentially, I wouldn't say there's much of a barrier there. It's just the knowledge is the barrier, I suppose, rather than anything else.
Yeah. So really, I suppose the coordination working together is quite a powerful tool then, in a way, isn't it? That you can call on each other for expertise in whatever the matter might be. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but that's what it sounds a little bit like. Yeah.
I think now we've got the confidence to make those inquiries very easily, or structures to make them happen automatically, or a process, and that's something that has evolved well, I think, in the last 10 years.
Right, that's good. That's good. Thank you, Danny. Right, the next question is from me. Do any of you have an example you wish to share of where you have worked successfully with Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service? I know you've been giving us them as you're going along, but is there any others that you want to give us now? Perhaps if I can come to Angie first.
I was going to mention, it's already been mentioned once today, the Hawks Tour kind of site, where we've got an issue at the moment. Obviously, I think we were involved in that previously with the prosecution, but again, with that, one of my senior compliance officer attended and helped with a coordinated approach on that visit. Fire brigade and everyone, and safeguarding everybody involved. Yeah, it's a good example.
Good, thank you, Danny. Joe, anything from you?
Yeah, I'm conscious it's probably a public meeting, so I'll just say there was a hotel in Penzance that we worked closely together on, and that was a significant fire risk to those living in it and a great concern to the local community. So we worked very closely on that, and both authorities used powers available to them to try and bring a satisfactory conclusion to that case. So it's a very good example. And it also draws me back to the other example in that it isn't always the case that one service has the power that's used and the other not. It can be a situation where properties and the situations facing officers need a combination of both services to achieve the outcome that's needed to protect safety. So I won't give you the specific address.
No, that's sensible not to, because although the public aren't here with us today, the recording will be available to the public, that they can look at it afterwards. So that's a good point. Thank you. Chris, anything from you?
Yes, sort of, rather than building specific, but certainly, as I mentioned already, we have a very useful arrangement whereby we have access to the fire brigade equipment to get us access to things if necessary, and we've used that a number of times. That also has the advantage of actually being a non-fire related training opportunity for the fire service in some cases. So where there isn't an immediate life safety issue necessarily in the context of a fire, but where there's a good learning or training opportunity to sort something out very effectively. But recently, in fact, just this week, we've been working together on fire brigade access. So when we're dealing with a building regs application, is trying to work out a protocol in a place like Cornwall where you have limited access anyway in a lot of settlements. Whether there's middle ground between what the building regs would guide you as an ideal solution, but trying to marry that with the realities of Cornwall and where people like building houses. So we're trying to come together with a sort of a protocol, a hymn sheet, if you like, as to where we can be flexible and where we can't, and what measures are appropriate. We've done a number of bits of work on consultation responses with to government, and that's been very, very useful and eye-opening. And I think the key one that was probably one of the most useful things was going on a joint sprinklers training course, because I think we all now understand how complex sprinkler systems are and how reliant they are on water pressure to actually be a possible solution to a problem. It's not a case of just sticking some plumbing in and they work if you don't have water pressure, or you don't have space to store 3 cubic meters of water in the roof and a structure to support it. The practicalities of sprinklers are far more nuanced and complex than I think perhaps either of us appreciated 10 years ago, and that's been really very useful because it saves you dishing up a solution that might not actually be practically possible. So again, not to say there's anything wrong with sprinklers, it's just you've got to know what practicalities there are to putting them in and where they're there for an option or not, perhaps.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I'm conscious of the time, and we've still got another 6 questions to go. So if we can be sort of a bit more concise, maybe with the responses, that would be really helpful. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be cheeky, because what you're telling us is very interesting. But if we can be a little bit mindful of that, it'd be helpful. The next question is from Martin, please.
Thanks, Chair. And this one actually will hopefully be a quickie because it really builds on the previous answers. Considering that some of you would have been in district authorities, what some of you would have been in the county council, and of course the fire service is part of the county council. Has the unitary authority, or the creation of the unitary authority, brought any benefits to you in terms of your ability to work together?
Shall I go quickly?
Yes, please, sir.
I think the benefits have been pretty remarkable, actually. This really, the way we work now would not have happened previously, in my view. So we would be not working in the same way we work at the fire brigade now if we weren't in the same unitary authority, in my view.
Thank you.
That's definitely better. Yeah, obviously, you know, because it's almost like you're part of the same team now.
Yeah.
You know, the same authority, all together, working together. Yeah, definitely.
And I would echo that unequivocally, yes.
Yeah, brilliant.
And yeah, definitely.
That's good. Thank you. It's good to hear. The next question is from Dominic, please.
Okay, thank you. A bit of a cheeky question, and try and ignore the fact Justin's in the room. So can you tell us whether meetings regarding statutory issues are well attended, specifically by Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service?
Shall I jump in? I know for the meetings that I've mentioned, we always have attendance at those meetings, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Joe, do you want to go next?
Yeah, there's always no problem with attendance and the meetings I'm at at all.
Thank you. And Chris?
I'd agree. Sometimes I'm surprised that they can fight fires and attend all the meetings at the same time. But as I say, they're expert hat jugglers. So yes, and really quite impressive turnout at surprising number of things.
Yeah,
okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Dominic. Yeah. Matt, next, please.
Okay, this kind of covers the same thing again, really, but slightly different taint. Is engagement and correspondence from Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service timely in relation to your prospective services? There's a mouthful.
I would say yes for that as well. Like you say, you've obviously got these meetings, but you've got the work that goes on in between with case officers, and yeah, there's that interaction there. You know, you can always contact someone. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, it's probably best to draw back on our statutory consultation between the services, because it's just, you know, it's an important part of it, and there's no problems with that whatsoever. So I mean, that works well, and then our referrals between us are working well, as far as I'm aware. So when cases that need our attention, they come to mine and Justin's attention also, which is a good sign.
Yeah,
I think.
Good. And Chris?
Yeah, and I would say that's improved as well. I think in the last couple of years, the statutory consultation process is now much quicker usually, and if not, you can pick up the phone and they'll shuffle it to the top and sort it for you. And equally, in every other respect, the fire brigade are probably the proactive side of the equation and chivying us along to try and move things forward. So you know, I'm really impressed by that.
Thank you. That's really helpful to know that. John, sorry. Okay, John, next, please.
Yeah, thank you. If you could improve one area, what would it be? And can you each advise, please?
I'm a bit stumped. I wouldn't know what to say. I can't think of anything at the minute.
That's good as well.
That's probably a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Joe?
Yeah, I'll go. I'll refer back to my other point. I maybe got in there a bit early, but our building of data sets and using them, the use of our available data and how we gather data that's relevant to us looking forward. So right from the outset, what evidence do we gather in private sector housing? What evidence do we gather in the fire service when they go to a fire, for example, or where they do home safety checks? And then how does that run right through the whole process to lead us towards where we need to direct our resource?
Yeah, that would be good. So back to IT again, almost, isn't it?
Yeah, and using data. And to build a proper intelligence picture.
Yeah, thank you. Chris?
Really resource, as I've already highlighted, time and knowledge resource, but people who aren't wearing 5 hats, so people that can wear a single hat to go and sit down and do the work that needs to be done. And the building safety bill is a clear piece of work we will need to do. but there's lots of other things I think we want to do around that peripherally, some of which may overlap, some of which we wanted to do anyway. And it's a case of who and where and what and how, really, rather than an aspiration to do it. It's the who's going to do it question. So it is quite literally resource.
Thank you. Okay, John?
Yeah, lovely. Thanks. Yeah.
Right. The next one is from me, if I may, please. Can each of you tell us how do the objectives in the inquiry's terms of reference affect your respective organisation or service? Perhaps if I could come to Chris on that one first, please.
I had a horrible feeling you were going to do that. No, I'm going to have to re-refer to them a second because they're
do you want me to read them to you?
If you would, that would be useful. That will speed things up.
One minute, I've got them here. The first one is to consider whether the current assessment of risk is an appropriate model for Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service. And the second one is to consider the future allocation of resource to deliver Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service's overarching protection role, including statutory and non-statutory activities and the primary authority role.
Okay, well, the first thing, in a way, because we don't have, from the building control perspective, we don't have an awful lot of contact or overlap with the risk balancing side of what the fire service do. I haven't really got any objective comment on that one way or the other, because it's not something I have an awful lot to do with. I do know, though, that in Cornwall you have strange situations where, for example, the number of small holiday lets actually present a relatively high risk, but the resource to audit those is sort of exponentially high compared to a city of hotels, for example. Much harder to grapple with, but as I've said before, not necessarily any lower risk on an individual basis. Some of those holiday lets are concerning, verging on dangerous in some cases, I'm sure, and hard to. There are many off radar ones as well. So really, that would be my only comment on that. In terms of, sorry, just remind me the second part. The
wait again. Hold on. Bear with me. The second one was to consider the future allocation of resource to deliver. Yes.
So
we've been
in effect,
through, haven't we?
I've already addressed that. And it is qualified, knowledgeable, experienced people who can critically analyse stuff at a level of detail appropriate to what you need to do.
Thank you. Joe, did you want to add anything more to that?
Yeah, so I think to be quick, the properties that are a risk will be a risk to the fire service and private sector housing. The fire service clearly has other areas it covers in relation to commercial activities and others, but I think we could do more to understand what the risk is in some of the untapped areas to date. So what if we were to use the risk assessment process and our understanding to actually try and understand what are the risks buried in some of the properties that we've never historically been involved in. The context being is that there's a lot of rented houses out there we know nothing about. There's no duty to license them with the authority. There's no record of them anywhere. And there's maybe a lot of buried risk that we're unaware of, is the point I'm making. So and I think because it will be of relevance to both our services should we identify it, understand it, and then make a reasonable judgment of whether we need to intervene or not. Yeah,
thank you. Angie?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can sort of add a lot more to that. I don't know the detail of how the risk is kind of assessed, if you like, but we have our own separate kind of regimes that work together. And the resource on, obviously, when you say about the statutory side, for me, that's kind of like we're statutory, we've got a licensed premises, we get applications in, and there is resource, and they do comment on those applications. There's not really a lot I can add to that, I don't think.
Thank you, my darling, that's good. And now the final question, you'll probably be very pleased to hear, is from Martin.
Thanks, and this is one that we're asking everyone. If you could put forward 3 or 4 recommendations to the inquiry that would support your organisation or service, what would they be, and importantly, why? Just briefly, we don't need really long answers on this, but any particular recommendations you'd like to see? Shall I start with my top with Joe? I don't know how you're all appearing on other screens.
Sure, that's okay. That's fine. So, well, again, I sound like a broken record here, but I think my first recommendation will be that we understand that we consider the quality of our data and we consider how we use it. So that'd be my recommendation. And then I think once we're in that position, given those improvements, we can consider applying greater resource and developing the initiatives we've got between us to apply them in the right place.
Yeah.
So I'd like us to understand our data better and then work together, utilising the resource that we've got together to try and intervene proactively and effectively moving forward. And that needs to be, in my view, as a partnership looking forward, so that we can use the best power at the right time, the right place to start achieving successful outcomes.
Thanks,
That's summed up really well, that is. Thank you.
Chris.
Sorry, was that me?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I'll go back to my time and resource as my first two again. I'm not going to go over those in further detail anymore, but I think the third thing would be some clarity on holiday let type guidance. It's a surprisingly big part of our day-to-day job. So the guidance is in flux. So that it would be useful to pin that down, but I'm very aware that's reliant on some national legislation that's not quite landed yet, I don't think, Justin.
And
Nearly, but not quite.
I was saying also an issue that is broad-reaching beyond the scope of this inquiry, right through to getting your bin emptied, through to business rates versus council tax.
Yeah. And the final thing would be, I guess, maybe a better understanding of how the fire brigade or the fire service do kind of assess risk, and if going in to do an audit on a premises, perhaps, you know, where's the line is drawn, or a little bit of a greater understanding that I think would be useful for us. Not critical, but I think it would help us do our job better, I suppose.
Thanks, Chris. And finally, Angie.
Yeah, I don't know that I can add a lot. I mean, the data is obviously important from what Joe was saying, and you mentioned earlier on, you know, somebody said IDOCs, and we've got a bit of that as well, and it's everyone having a bit of different systems really, and that's maybe an issue for the whole council, isn't it, about, you know, sort of systems and collating things. But again, you know, mentioning sort of fire safety audits, maybe there's something that we could do perhaps with our teams as joint awareness. You know, could they go along to one of them for sort of like some training, or sitting on one, you know, just to get, like you say, a bit more knowledge of what happens. At least they're, you know, obviously got, you know, they've got more information on that. Then if they've got inquiries, they understand it better. But, you know, an awareness rather than obviously trying to learn everything and pass that information on. Yeah. It's an awareness that would help in the role that they're in. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, my love. That's really good. Right. That's all the questions. So I'm just making notes at the same time as talking to you. That's all the questions. So can I thank the three of you very much for your time and patience this afternoon. It's been really helpful to get your input into this inquiry. So we are very grateful to you, because I know how busy you all are. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you. That is the end of the session now. So if we thank you and send you on your way, that'll be really helpful. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Nice. Take care.
Very good.
Thank you. Right, now that is the end of the formal business. So Joe, can you advise us? I think that we need to stop the recording now. Do we need to go to a different Teams meeting to have our catch up, or do we do it on this channel?
Chairman, I think the best thing to do is to stop the recording on this session, which I'll do now.
Thank you.